Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's program. Today we're starting a brand new program, and this is session 1 of this new program. And today's program is entitled Proving the Complexity Factors. Proving the Complexity Factors. And the necessity of this program seems to be imminent upon all of us due to tumultuous recent changes in the Division of Workers' Compensation's interpretation of the complexity factors under CCR 9795. And what I want to share with you in this program is the very latest information related to the complexity factors up to the minute current. In fact, even as recent as 2 days ago, we've received new information about the Division of Workers' Compensation's movement as relates to changing the language of the complexity factors in the face and in the light of the recent 2018 QME settlement agreement. So suffice to say that the QME report is yet again changing again. And we may not have seen the end of all the changes in store for the QME evaluation. So I want to share with you some ideas that will help you to properly bill your medical legal evaluation reports so that you can maximize your reimbursements to the extent as allowed under the medical legal fee schedule, and also so that you can comply with the Division of Workers' Compensation strict requirements that we as qualified medical evaluators not overinflate, not exaggerate, and not fraudulate the complexity factors. Now, it seems that we recently escaped by the skin of our teeth with the 2018 settlement agreement. Up until just 2 to 3 weeks ago, we as qualified medical evaluators had seen our reimbursements for our QME reports literally decimated. Decimated, I assume, by the prefix DEC, D-E-C, signifies that perhaps there's one-tenth involvement in the definition of the word decimated. And to say that our QME reimbursements were reduced by 90% down to 10% of their original value is not too much of an exaggeration. Literally, we basically lost the ML-104 report as we had come to know the ML-104 report. We had lost some of the complexity factors under ML-103, and basically more and more reports were being driven down into the ML-102 and ML-103 billing levels. But thank goodness, due to stroke of genius, persistence, and brilliant work, the Los Angeles attorneys who negotiated the QME settlement agreement had a fantastic accomplishment in orchestrating the agreement that they did. But the flip side of that coin is that the QME settlement agreement may not be a lasting document, because no sooner than just 2 days ago, the Division of Workers' Compensation released some new language, some new proposed language that's now going to go through the rulemaking process as they originally should have with their former interpretation of the complexity factors. But the new language is now in the 2-week review period, and it's open for public comment. And if the new proposed language passes, there will be some dramatic changes again to the medical legal fee schedule under CCR 9795. So in today's discussion, I want to share with you where we are exactly today as a result of the QME settlement agreement. I want to share with you some future directions as to where the complexity factors may go if indeed the DWC's new language does get passed and ruled into law. And then in the second part of this program, I want to share with you how to write your QME reports in such a way that reimbursement for your complexity factors is automatic, so that reimbursement for your complexity factors is unchallenged, so that reimbursement for your complexity factors is unquestioned. In other words, when the parties look at your report will very quickly prove to the parties your compliance with the exact definition of the complexity factors under CCR 9795. You see, it seems that the reason we got into this jam is because many doctors, not just a few, many doctors took advantage of the complexity factors, exploited the complexity factors, billed for the complexity factors when their reports did not actually reflect the use of those complexity factors. Now, let me ask you, would you reimburse a medical legal evaluation for complexity factors wherein the report itself did not actually employ the complexity factor? It sounds stupid, it sounds ridiculous to us when I say it to you that way, but that's the case and that's the situation as it was. Doctors were billing for complexity factors that they did not employ within the body of their medical legal evaluation report. So the new trend, the new era, the new procedure that I'm going to recommend to you is that in every single report that you submit, you prove to the parties, you pound them over the head, you poke them between the eyes, you punch them in the gut with your complexity factors and your proof of the use of the complexity factors within the body of the report, so that even a chimpanzee, if a chimpanzee was called in to review your report, even a chimpanzee could see that your report contains each and every complexity factor for which you're billing for and for which you expect to be reimbursed. So for many doctors who are subscribers to my weekly blogs and purchasers of my continuing education programs, this is simply going to be a review of material that you've previously learned. But there's going to be a few new tips even for you. For other doctors, for many of you, this may be a brand new discussion that you've never heard before, and this is going to be your first introduction into proper billing under CCR 9795. So I have a fascinating program for you, and I'm sure this is going to be extremely valuable for you throughout the remainder of your entire career as a QME. So for today's program, I've provided 3 sources of references for you. The first one is the current copy of CCR 9795, also known as the Medical Legal Fee Schedule, so I'd like to have you have that in front of you. Also, I've provided you a copy of the recent 2018 QME Settlement Agreement. I'd like you to retrieve that and have that in front of you because we will be referring to that as well. And then I've also provided a copy for you of the brand new, meaning less than 10 days old, new language promulgated by the Division of Workers' Compensation and now going through the formal rulemaking process, which contains new language, new proposed language for both CCR 9793 and also 9795. So I'd like to have you have those 3 documents in front of you so that you can lay your own eyes on these references as we go through those. So I'm going to retrieve those references myself and be right back with you here in just a very few moments as we begin today's new program entitled Prove the Complexity Factors. So I'll be back with you here in just a very few moments. Okay, so I have my reference materials here with me. I hope you have your reference materials with you as well so that you can lay your own eyes on these passages as we discuss each specific passage. Now, the philosophy of this program is that with each and every report that you submit, your use of the complexity factors for which you're billing and for which you expect to be paid for your report needs to be proven to the parties. You need to prove to the parties that your report contains a fabulous discussion, for each and every complexity factor in your report. So I tell my doctor subscribers who are subscribers to my weekly blog and purchasers of my QME continuing education home study programs, I ask them this question. I ask them, which sections of your report should you spend the most time on? Which sections of your report should be the most visually captivating? Which sections of your report should contain elaborate discussion? Which sections of your report, if a layperson was to look at your report, which sections of your report should stand out as absolute masterpieces? Which sections of your report are the most critical sections of your report? What do you think? Let me ask you, is the social history section of your report a critical section? Is the occupational history section of your report a critical section? Is the review of systems section of your report a critical section of your report? No. Those are subcritical sections of your report. The critical sections of your report, the most important sections of your report, the sections of your report upon which your major focus should lie, are the sections of your report related to the complexity factors. So we know that review of records is a complexity factor. We know that causation is a complexity factor. We know that apportionment is a complexity factor. Therefore, the review of records section of your report should be a masterpiece. The causation section of your report should be a masterpiece. The apportionment section of your report should be an absolute masterpiece. If it's not a masterpiece, would you reimburse yourself for your review of records section of your report? Would you reimburse yourself for your causation section of your report? Would you reimburse your apportionment section of your report? I see some causation and apportionment sections of the report where the causation discussion simply says, causation is work-related, period. And the doctor believes that that discussion, causation is work-related. Causation is work-related. A four-word discussion qualifies causation as a complexity factor for which their report should be elevated to the ML 104 level, for which they should be reimbursed at the highest reimbursement rate. And I'm here to tell you that it's that type of thinking that has gotten us into the trouble that we're in now. Now, the causation section of your report should be a masterpiece. It should be fabulous. It should be clearly written. It should be visually stunning. It should include paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of reasons, of how and why reasonings in support of your opinion and conclusion. Your opinion on causation must be substantial medical evidence. Let me ask you this. Would you reimburse a QME report for causation as a complexity factor if the doctor offered an opinion in the causation section of his report that did not qualify as substantial medical evidence? If that opinion did not qualify as substantial medical evidence and did not actually resolve the disputed issue of causation, should we reimburse the doctor for the full value of that report for causation as a complexity factor? I wouldn't. Would you? I wouldn't. I'd send the report back unpaid because the doctor did not resolve the issue. So the point is, these sections of your report have to be fabulous. They have to be perfect. They have to qualify as substantial medical evidence in order for the complexity factors, for you to be able to expect the complexity factors to be reimbursed. So from here on out, we're going to focus on the sections of our report that relate to the complexity factors, and I'm going to give you some ideas as to just how to do that as we go. Before we do that, I want to talk to you about some of these complexity factors and explain some of the nuances of the complexity factors that apparently many doctors either have not been educated on or they don't understand, or perhaps they've even chosen to ignore some of these nuances. So we're going to focus in on the ML103 and ML104 billing levels under CCR 9795. And to begin with, beginning with ML103 as relates to ML103 and also as relates to ML104, the first requirement listed under CCR 9795 when billing for the various complexity factors, meaning not billing under ML101, not billing under ML102, not billing under ML105 or ML106, but under billings of ML103 and ML104, which use the complexity factors, it tells us in law that a report must contain a separate section at the beginning of the report. Where should the separate section be? I've seen many doctors include the separate section at the end of the report. Does that comply with law? It says in a separate section at the beginning of the report, the physician shall clearly and concisely specify which of the following complexity factors were required for the evaluation. That's part one. Which complexity factors were required? So imagine the doctor says that causation was required. That's step one. Step number two, it says, and the circumstances which made these complexity factors applicable to the evaluation. So it's a two-part requirement. Number one, well, first of all, we have to have a separate section in the beginning of the report. That's step one. And then step two, if you use a complexity factor, you have to describe which complexity factor was required. And then number two, what were the circumstances that led to your use of the complexity factors, which made the complexity factors applicable. Okay? So many doctors do not have a separate section at the beginning of their report. They simply throw out a bill for a high dollar value with no support behind the complexity factors. The purpose of today's discussion in this program is for you to be able to prove that you deserve to be paid for the complexity factors. So your proof begins by having a separate section at the beginning of your report. So here's a sample report. I've taken this from my template. So this would be page 1 of the report. We go on to page 2 of the report. After we have the examinee demographic data here in a chart, we have an opening introductory paragraph here. We give the data about the location of the examination location, whether or not an interpreter was present, okay, and some background data here. And then immediately, we provide the reader of the report with the separate section. So here begins the separate section in highlight, right here. And it goes on to the bottom of the page, and it goes on to the next page with all the complexity factors listed here. Below all the complexity factors, I'm recommending that you use a table here to summarize for the payer your times involved in each of these activities. So you have your separate section that describes your use of the complexity factors. You have a separate section wherein you describe the circumstances that made the complexity factors applicable. And then you have a table below that wherein you can summarize all of your times for the reader of the report and for the payer of the report. So this separate section, just to elaborate on this separate section, it contains in the template every single one of the complexity factors. So for here for example, complexity factor number 1 right here, it says 2 or more hours of face-to-face time by the physician with the injured worker. Now, if you don't use this complexity factor, if you don't have 2 or more hours of face-to-face time, you would simply delete it from the template. But your template should have each and every one of the complexity factors listed so that you can explain to the parties which complexity factors you used, and so that you can explain to the parties the circumstances that made those complexity factors applicable to the evaluation. Okay, so that's required. It's required by law. If you don't have a separate section in the beginning of your report where you summarize the complexity factors, I wouldn't pay for it. I wouldn't pay for your report. Why would I pay for your report? Your report doesn't comply with the requirements of law that tell us how our reports are supposed to be submitted. I recently reviewed a report where the doctor had no section at the beginning of his report to describe the complexity factors. He did have a chart wherein he totaled his time, but lo and behold, somehow, I don't know how the doctor did it, but in arriving at his billing, dollar amount billing for the report, he simply took his hours involved with the evaluation and multiplied his hours by 2.2 and came up with some number of dollar amount to be billed, and he in no way complied with the requirements of CCR 9795. And I wouldn't pay for that report. And if you don't contain a separate section in the beginning of your report, don't expect to be paid. You shouldn't be paid. I wouldn't pay it. Would you pay it? You wouldn't pay it. So you have to comply exactly with the language of the law, and this is more important now than ever. So that's one thing. So let's talk about some of the complexity factors and some of the nuances involved with complexity factors. The first complexity factor under ML 103 is 2 or more hours of face-to-face time by the physician with the injured worker. Now, it's interesting. When I review QME's reports, it's interesting as to how they document, or I should say it's interesting as to how they fail to document or how they fail to prove their face-to-face time with the injured worker. And I usually get suspicious when I see face-to-face times that are rounded to the half hour, that are rounded to the hour. So the physician will say, face-to-face time with the examinee was 3 hours, or face-to-face time with the examinee was 3.5 hours, okay? Well, it's interesting. In the recent QME disciplinary proceedings that we just went through with the Division of Workers' Compensation, it seems that face-to-face time was not one of the complexity factors that was challenged by the Division of Workers' Compensation. The Division of Workers' Compensation did not seem to have an issue with QME's fraudulating or overinflating or overstating their face-to-face time with the examinee. But let me tell you, scrutiny on face-to-face time, if it's not present with us now, it's coming. Shouldn't it be coming? Wouldn't you scrutinize billing times for any type of service that a provider, vendor wanted you to pay for? Wouldn't you scrutinize the billing? Wouldn't you scrutinize the time involved with various activities that are subcategorized out on the billing? Of course you would. Of course you would. So I'm telling you that scrutiny on face-to-face time is coming. You should document your face-to-face time with the examinee to the minute. To the minute. Not rounded up to 30 minutes, not rounded up or down to the hour, to the minute. So under this complexity factor, it would say 2 or more hours of face-to-face time by the physician with the injured worker. Total face-to-face time with Mrs. Jones was 2 hours and 38 minutes. And you should provide a statement, a signed statement by the examinee along with your report, wherein the examinee signs in at the start time, face-to-face start time, and the examinee signs out at the face-to-face stop time. This is how you prove your use of the, or prove your compliance with the face-to-face time complexity factor. Similarly, the next complexity factor has to do with review of records. Now, isn't it amazing that the review of records, like face-to-face time, is not a complexity factor that the Division of Workers' Compensation was concerned that doctors were fraudulating. And I can tell you that scrutiny on review of records is now upon us. It's the language of the review of records is now proposed to change. It's going to change, and it had to change. It has to change, it had to change, it's going to change. Because this is an area where doctors, QMEs, have great control over overinflating and overstating their review of records time. Now, we're going to talk about review of records in great detail in another session, but let me ask you, what would constitute a review of records, and why should you be paid as a complexity factor for your review of records? Why should you be paid? Why is review of records one of the complexity factors? The reason review of records is one of the complexity factors is because the review of records is critical. The review of records is essential. The review of records is the basis upon which your opinions and conclusions later in the report will be based. The review of records is something that should be referred to in later sections of your report. You should refer back to the review of records time and time and time again in formulating your opinions and conclusions. The review of records is critical. So many doctors simply assign their review of records to an outside third party who takes the stack of records like this and simply through dictation recapitulates the entirety of each and every document into a finished product book for the doctor, which is available to the doctor in electronic format. And the doctor simply reads the document and then cuts and pastes the document into the body of his report without ever making reference to the review of records in later sections of the report, without ever referring to the review of records and formulating the opinions and conclusions, and without ever demonstrating and proving to the reader that anything, any single entry in the review of records had any impact on the doctor's thinking or in the doctor's opining or in the doctor's concluding, and that does not constitute a review of records. The review of records is actually governed by 4 laws, 2 labor codes and 2 codes of regulation, and we'll go over those in the future in our next session. But let me ask you, if you knew, and everybody knows this, you're not getting away with any great scam, okay? Everybody knows that you're farming out your review of records. If you knew that the QME's review of records was being farmed out to a third party that has transcriptionists reviewing the records, recapitulating the entirety of the medical records for which they charge $12 an hour, and they send you a bill for $120 for the whole review of records, and you, as the QME, then bill within the body of your report using a review of records, and you bill for 6, 8, 10 hours of review of records time at $250 per hour, everybody knows that you did not do 12 hours of review of records, especially when the report contains no reference to any citation within the review of records. So I can tell you that review of records scrutiny is coming. And I'm going to share with you exactly how to do your review of records so that it actually complies with as a complexity factor. And this is going to immeasurably not only help you comply with the complexity factors, but it's going to immeasurably improve the content and quality and process of your QME reporting. It's going to make your QME reports so much more valuable when you actually use the records that you receive to formulate your opinions and conclusions later on in the body of your report. Let's talk about one more complexity factor today and set the stage for our next session. The next complexity factor is 2 or more hours of medical research by the physician. Now, this is a tall complexity factor. Many doctors will never, ever do 2 whole hours of review of medical research on a particular case. Why would you need to do 2 hours? I myself have never used this complexity factor as it's written here, 2 or more hours. I've used it in combination to arrive at 6 or more hours under complexity factor 5, but I've never done 2 or more hours of medical research on any single case. Now, that's not to say that it can't be done or that it never should be done, but I'm just telling you my personal experience. And this is a tall threshold as a complexity factor. If you use medical research as a complexity factor, the definition of medical research is clearly defined in CCR 9793. So CCR 9793 tells us what constitutes medical research. Not everything constitutes medical research. I recently reviewed a report where the doctor billed for 2.5 hours of medical research. So I went through the report page by page, looking for the section of the report entitled medical research. There was no such section in the report. Now let me ask you, if you received billing for a report entitled with 2.5 hours billed for medical research, do you think that there should be a substantial section in the report entitled medical research? Does that make sense to you, or does that just sound silly? This is the kind of stuff that qualified medical evaluators are getting in trouble for. They're billing for 2.5 hours of medical research, and yet there's no section in the report entitled medical research. Well, I'm here to tell you today that if you use medical research as a complexity factor, that section of your report should be a masterpiece. It should be unbelievable. It should be amazing. It should be visually stunning. It should be logically correct. It should qualify as substantial evidence. It should support your opinions and conclusions. Otherwise, what's the necessity of the medical research? So you need to exactly comply with the dictates of the complexity factor. The dictates of the complexity factor tell us that any evaluator who specifies medical research as a complexity factor must also provide a list of citations to the sources that they reviewed and excerpt or include copies of the medical evidence relied upon. Now, medical research as a complexity factor is proposed to change. The use of medical research as a complexity factor is expected to tighten. The threshold for the use of medical research is expected to become even taller. And the reason is, many doctors are citing medical research as a complexity factor when the report in no way demonstrates any benefit gained through the use of the medical research. If you're going to bill for medical research, do you think that the medical research should contribute to your opinions and conclusions? Should the medical research be pivotal in arriving at your final opinions and conclusions? Should the medical research contribute to the logical reasoning of the report? Of course it should. The reader should benefit through your use of the medical research. If you're expected to be paid for 2-3 hours of medical research at $500, $750, shouldn't there be some value in the report? Shouldn't there be some value to the report for the money spent on medical research? Of course there should. I know this sounds stupid. This sounds silly. But we have qualified medical evaluators that are billing for medical research wherein the report contains no section entitled medical research, and they give the reader of the report no benefit or no value from the medical research. And the Division of Workers' Compensation is clamping down on that. In fact, the language involved with medical research is expected to change, and I'm going to share that more on that with you in our very next session. So For today, doctors, I want to give you the take-home point. And the take-home point is that the complexity factors are quite clear as to their language and are quite clear as to their requirements. But many doctors are not familiar with the complexity factors. Some doctors who work for third-party evaluation groups don't do their own billing. And so they're not aware as to how their billing is using the complexity factors. And they're getting in trouble for that. Well, if you sign the report and you're the evaluator assigned to the evaluation, you're responsible for your use of the complexity factors. You can't simply say, well, I didn't know how my third-party group was billing out my reports. I don't know, they do everything for me. All I do is the face-to-face evaluation. No, you're responsible. You're responsible. And you need to review each and every complexity factor that you're billing for to make sure that it exactly complies with the language of CCR 9795 and that your report proves beyond any doubt that your report uses the complexity factors the way that they're described in law. So that's a key point, and I'm sure that's something that you can begin to implement in your very next evaluation. Now, in our next session, we're going to dissect causation and apportionment and report preparation as billable complexity factors. And I'm going to share with you where we are now with those thanks to the QME settlement agreement and where those complexity factors are expected to go if the new proposed language passes. And I'm going to show you how to prove to the parties that you qualify to be reimbursed for causation as a complexity factor, for apportionment as a complexity factor, and how you can expect to get paid for your report preparation under each and every qualifier under the ML 104 report. So for today, I want to thank you for joining me on today's discussion. Look forward to being with you on our very next discussion as well, as we continue our ongoing series entitled Proving the Complexity Factors. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.